The numbers came first. Not fire, not sound, numbers. 4.1 million, scrolling in white beneath the Prime Arbiter's seal, each digit clean and unhurried, as though Zaltoris had simply corrected an accounting error. Commander Irina Solis stood in the lower tier of the zenith spire and did not look away from the feed. She held a scorched brass astrolabe in both hands, small enough to pocket, heavy enough that her wrists ached. The brass was warped on one side, fused where the heat had been fast and total. It had belonged to an archivist on Ethelgard. She did not know his name. The colony's records had burned with him. Up on the high dais, Prime Arbiter Zaltoris was still speaking. His voice came in low, vibrating pulses that the translation rig converted into something close to a human baritone, measured, almost gentle, the way a surgeon sounds when he explains a procedure that will hurt. His 4 optical clusters swept the chamber. He did not look at Solis. She was not the kind of thing he looked at. The Ethelgard Resonance Spire conducted unauthorized spatial studies within a restricted corridor, he said. The correction was proportional. The ascendancy does not issue second warnings. Solis's thumb moved across the back of the astrolabe. The metal was still faintly warm, though it had been 14 hours. She noted this on her field slate, a grey matte rectangle worn smooth at the edges, and then looked back up at Zaltoris. 4.1 million. Proportional. She wrote that down too. Stay with me. What she did with that slate in the next 10 minutes is the part they still argue about in fleet academies. 3 rows above Solis, the chamber's ambient system maintained a precise 21 degrees. It smelled of filtered iron air, and faintly, the mineral cold of the spire's outer hull, a smell like licking a coin. The overhead panels cast a thin, bluish light that made every species present look slightly ill. The Velari delegates caught it worst. Their crystalline plating shifted from iridescent to a dull pewter under that light, losing the polish that made them look invincible. Zaltoris did not look dull. He never did. He was still outlining the terms of what he called containment. Human orbital foundries, to be decommissioned and transferred to ascendancy oversight within 60 days. The Vale Transit Network, the vast civilian logistics web that threaded human space like capillaries through a body, to be placed under ascendancy traffic control immediately. Any resistance would trigger a second, larger correction. He used the word correction 3 times. Solis wrote it down each time. The delegate beside her, a junior consul named Harrow, leaned close and whispered something about precedent, about filing an emergency motion with the secondary synod, about the 17 other species watching this feed right now. Solis did not whisper back. She was watching Zaltoris's hands, 4 of them, each moving with the slow, deliberate grace of a creature that had never needed to rush. He was not nervous. He was not even attentive, not really. His outermost optical clusters had already drifted toward the chamber exit, as though the rest of this meeting was a formality he was performing for the record. He had already decided she had nothing to say. She found this useful. When Zaltoris finished and turned his gaze down to her tier, finally, briefly, Solis met it without blinking. She set the astrolabe on the railing in front of her. She picked up her slate. She read from it in a flat, even voice. Noted, preparations will be made. That was all. The chamber held a silence that lasted almost 4 full seconds. 4 seconds is a long time when 18 senior delegates are waiting for an objection. Harrow made a small, pained sound beside her. Zaltoris's optical clusters brightened fractionally, the Velari equivalent of a smile. He inclined his head, and the session feed cut. Solis picked the astrolabe back up. She put it in her coat pocket. She did not speak again until they were in the corridor outside, where the filtered iron smell gave way to the sharper bite of recycled hydraulic fluid from the spire's service lifts. Get me a private channel to fleet logistics, she said. Standard civilian band. Route it through the transit relay. Harrow stared at her. That's not an encrypted military channel. No, she agreed. It's not. She pressed the lift call and waited, looking at the seam between the wall panel and the floor. There was a hairline crack there, running the length of the panel. Something in the spire's structure was under uneven stress. She noted the direction of the crack. The lift arrived. She stepped in. What happened in the next 6 hours, most of the council never saw directly. They saw the outputs. They saw the fleet movements on the public tactical displays, or rather, they saw what was not there. Human warships left the frontier. Not in retreat exactly, not the chaotic scatter of a force that knows it is beaten. They pulled back the way a tide pulls back, smooth, total, without hurry. Frontier posts that had been active for 30 years went dark one by one, in an order that made no tactical sense to anyone watching. They did not fall back to a defensive line. They fell back past any defensible position and kept going. Subarbiter Vex, commanding the Velari Ascendancy's primary strike formation from the flagship Kethvar, watched the displays and said nothing for a long time. He was the youngest subarbiter the Ascendancy had promoted in 2 centuries, young enough that his crystalline plating still had a slight translucency at the edges, catching light the way ice does at its thinnest point. He had a reputation for patience that his seniors considered a virtue and his juniors considered unsettling. He pulled up the human fleet disposition again. Then again. "They're leaving the web," his tactical officer said. "The Vale transit corridors are completely unguarded." Vex looked at the display for another moment. The human ships were not massing. They were not forming a defensive shell around any population center. They were simply going away. A species facing the largest armada in Ascendancy history should have left a mess. Should have had overlapping signals, frantic repositioning, some evidence of panic in the traffic logs. The logs were clean. The corridors were empty and lit and waiting. "Run the transit network scan again," Vex said. The results came back in under a minute. Civilian logistics signatures across the board. Cargo routing, passenger manifolds, maintenance pulses cycling on their normal schedule. The Vale Transit Network was doing exactly what it always did, moving freight, moving people, moving the quiet tonnage of a civilization going about its business. Civilian infrastructure, his officer confirmed. Unarmed, unshielded, standard transit configuration throughout. Vex watched the last human patrol vessel slip off the long-range sensors. Something was wrong. He could not name it. The pattern was too clean, too cooperative, like a hand opened wide to show it held nothing, which was the position a hand was in just before it closed. But the Prime Arbiter had issued his orders. The transit corridors were the fastest route to the human foundry systems. They were open. They were undefended. They were, by every scan and every registry, nothing but roads. Vex sent the go order to his formation and said nothing about the clean logs. Across human space, in an unremarkable systems management center built into the hull of a cargo processing station, 3 relay jumps from anywhere notable. A technician named Oris ran a standard calibration cycle on the Vale Transit Network's outer ring dampeners. It was not a standard calibration, but the readout said it was. The readout had been configured to say it was for 11 years. Oris finished the cycle, logged it as routine maintenance, and went to get a cup of coffee from the machine at the end of the corridor. The machine was broken. It dispensed hot water and nothing else. It had been broken for 2 weeks. He stood there for a moment, looking at the cup of hot water, and then drank it anyway. In the systems room behind him, the outer ring dampeners finished cycling into an inverted polarity state and held there, waiting. On a transport shuttle moving away from the Zenith Spire at standard civilian speed, Solis sat in a window seat and looked out at the Spire's understructure, a maze of docking arms and signal arrays and attitude jets, all currently lit for the ongoing council session. The Spire was built to impress. Everything about it said, "This is where decisions are made." The scale of it, the weight of it hanging in space, the way smaller vessels gave it a wide berth automatically. She looked at it the way she'd looked at the crack in the corridor wall. She opened her slate and began working through a transit routing table. Numbers, tonnage, schedules, the same figures she reviewed every week. She moved a column of cargo reroutes from one corridor cluster to another, a small adjustment, the kind of thing her logistics staff processed by the hundred every day. She sent it on the standard civilian band. Then she took the astrolabe out of her pocket and set it on the window ledge, facing the spire. The brass caught the station light and threw a thin arc of reflection onto the shuttle wall, just for a moment before the angle changed. She put it away. She did not look at the spire again. The shuttle cleared the spire's signal shadow, and Solis felt the faint pressure change as the local traffic grid handed them off to deep transit control. She opened her routing table again. The adjustment she had sent 20 minutes ago had already propagated 3 relay jumps out. That was the thing about the Vale Transit network that most people never thought about. It was fast. Not fast the way a warship was fast. Fast the way a rumor was fast. The way a price change moved through a market before anyone could name who started it. A reroute filed on a standard civilian band moved at the speed of bureaucratic reflex, automatically, because 10,000 automated systems along the network's spine were built to accommodate it without asking why. She filed a second adjustment, smaller, a maintenance window opening on a cluster of transit corridors in the outer ring. Then she put the slate away and looked out the window at nothing in particular. The Kethvar crossed the first transit threshold at 3:40 local fleet time. Vex was on the command deck. He watched the corridor walls form around his ship. The Vale Transit Network's transit passages were not physical structures exactly, more like a sustained agreement between spatial geometry and the dampener arrays that lined each corridor's edges. From inside, they looked like a tunnel of faint blue light, very steady, almost peaceful. Behind the Kethvar, in a formation that stretched back further than any single sensor could track, 18,200 Velari dreadnoughts followed. The number was not abstract to Vex. He had served on 3 of those ships before this command. He knew their mass, their crew counts, the particular vibration their drives made at full cruise. He knew how long it took to bring one to a full stop. He knew what it meant to have 18,000 of them committed to a single corridor network, their drives cycling at transit speed, their weapons systems in standby. It meant there was no quick reversal, not at this scale. He filed that thought and moved on. Network traffic, he asked. Nominal, his sensor officer said. Cargo routing in the parallel corridors, no military signatures, passenger manifolds running on schedule. A civilization going about its day. Vex watched the corridor walls and did not find this as reassuring as it should have been. The formation moved deeper. The blue light of the transit passages held steady around them, perfectly maintained, the kind of steady that meant the dampener arrays were running without fault. 18,000 drives pushing through human infrastructure, and not a single alert, not a single challenge, not even an automated traffic query asking who they were and where they were going. The roads were just open. He had the scan run again. The scan results came back the same as before. Civilian signatures. Standard transit configuration. He was looking at the readout when his sensor officer spoke up. Subarbiter, the frequency pattern on the outer dampeners. Vex looked up. They're within tolerance, the officer said carefully. But the variance pattern, it doesn't match the maintenance schedule we pulled from the public registry. Vex crossed to the sensor display. The dampener frequency readout showed a slow oscillation, barely visible inside the green tolerance band. He had looked at transit dampeners hundreds of times. The oscillation pattern was almost right. The rhythm of it was slightly off, like a word pronounced correctly by someone who had learned it from reading and never heard it spoken. Could be a calibration lag, the officer said. The outer ring runs on automated cycles. Yes, Vex said, it could. He looked at the oscillation for another moment. Then he looked at the formation depth display, which showed the rearmost elements of his 18,000 ships still threading through the entry thresholds. The formation was fully committed now, every ship inside the corridor network. He thought about the human commander at the Zenith Spire, the one who had said noted and written things down. He thought about the cleanliness of the retreat, no mess, no panic, no frantic repositioning. He opened a channel to his signals team. Cross-reference the outer ring dampener oscillation against the last 14 months of maintenance logs. I want to know if this pattern appears anywhere prior to today. That will take approximately 4 minutes, Subarbiter. Yes, he said, it will. He stepped back from the display. In the corridor outside the Kethvar's command deck, a junior signals officer was walking to her post with a cup of something hot, careful not to spill it on the deck plating. She paused for a half-second outside the command deck door, hearing the silence inside, not the usual quiet of an orderly ship, but the specific quiet of a room where someone senior was thinking hard about something they had not named yet. She kept walking. On Earth's primary transit management hub, in a room with no windows and a ceiling low enough that tall people ducked instinctively, 3 technicians monitored the network's live telemetry. The telemetry was extremely interesting at the moment, in the way that an object falling from a great height is interesting. The lead technician, a woman named Preet, who had worked transit routing for 19 years, was watching the formation entry data scroll across her board. She had been watching it for 40 minutes without speaking. She had a thermos of cold tea at her elbow that she had not touched. 18,200 signatures, all inside the network, all tracking through the outer and mid-ring corridors, all running at transit crews, which meant their drives were committed to the network's spatial geometry and could not simply disengage. Preet knew the network the way a doctor knows a body, not from diagrams, but from having watched it function for a very long time. She knew which corridors ran warm and which ran cold. She knew where the load balanced naturally and where it needed help. She knew the sound the dampener arrays made when they were working normally, a low sub-frequency hum you felt in the soles of your feet more than heard, and she knew exactly what it meant when that hum changed register. It was changing now. Not fast, not in any way that would show up on a standard alert, but she felt it through the floor. She looked at the clock on the board, looked at the formation depth readout, did a small piece of arithmetic in her head that she had never been trained to do but had worked out herself over the last 11 years, whenever she let herself think about what the outer ring dampeners could do if someone told them to do something different. Then she picked up her thermos, poured the cold tea into the waste slot under the console, and went to the break room to get something fresh. There was nothing else she needed to do. Her part was done. Had been done for 11 years, in fact, one calibration cycle at a time. Vex's signals team came back in 3 minutes and 50 seconds, not 4. Subarbiter. The tone in the officer's voice was the careful, uninflected tone that meant I have found something I do not want to be the one to say. The oscillation pattern does not appear in any prior maintenance log. The outer ring dampener variance it matches no standard calibration sequence in the Ascendancy's reference library, or in the human public registry. Vex stood very still. It matches, the officer continued, a theoretical configuration. There is a paper, a Velari theoretical physics paper, 41 years old, that describes a hypothetical subdimensional polarity inversion. The paper concluded the configuration was impossible to sustain at scale. The energy requirement was. Was what? Vex said. The paper said it was too large, that you would need something like a system-wide grid to maintain the field. You would need, the officer paused, you would need something like this network. The transit corridor walls held their blue, steady light around the Kethvar. 18,200 ships, every drive committed to transit speed, every reactor cycling to maintain the corridor transit geometry. All of them, right now, threaded through a network that had just been described to him as a theoretical weapon that the Velari's own scientists had declared impossible. declared impossible because no one had ever tried to build it at civilizational scale. Declared impossible because the assumption had been that you would build it as a weapon, not as a road. Vex looked at the formation display for a long time. Then he opened a direct channel to the Kethvar's drive room. Engineering, what is our current reversal window? The engineering chief's answer came back in under 5 seconds, which meant she had already been running the numbers. At current transit depth and drive commitment, subarbiter, we do not have one, not across the full formation. Individual ships at the entry threshold could attempt to break transit, but the mid and rear formation would need approximately 9 minutes to reverse course, and that assumes the corridor geometry holds stable enough to. She stopped. She had done the same arithmetic Preet had done, apparently. Subarbiter, she said, what is the current state of the corridor geometry? Vex looked at the dampener frequency display. The oscillation was still within tolerance, still reading green, still looking like a calibration variance that could be explained 6 different routine ways. Nominal, he said. He closed the channel. He stood at the display with his hands very still at his sides and thought about a human commander who had said noted and picked up a scorched piece of brass and put it in her pocket and walked away. He thought about what it meant to build roads for 40 years and know, not plan, not hope, but know that someone would one day try to use them against you. He thought about the clean logs. He opened a channel to Prime Arbiter Zaltoris. Zaltoris received Vex's transmission in the Zenith Spire's secondary observation chamber, where the scale display showed the formation's progress as a constellation of moving lights threading through the human transit grid. He was watching those lights with the measured satisfaction of a task proceeding exactly as planned. Vex's voice came through flat and controlled. He described the dampener oscillation. He described the 41-year-old paper. He described the reversal window, or the lack of one. Zaltoris listened without speaking. When Vex finished, there was a silence. Then the Prime Arbiter said, "The network is civilian infrastructure. It has no offensive classification." "Yes, Prime Arbiter," Vex said. "That was our classification." Another silence, longer. On the scale display, the constellation of lights continued moving, steady and committed, deeper into the web. Zaltoris studied the display. He was a careful thinker. That was not the problem. The problem was that he was careful within a set of assumptions he had held for so long they felt like physics. Civilian infrastructure was not a weapon. It had never been a weapon. The category was clear, had always been clear, and the human network matched every definition of civilian infrastructure in the Ascendancy's reference system. He had been right about everything. He was still right about everything. He said, "Maintain formation speed. Continue to target." The lights kept moving. Solis' shuttle docked at Relay Station Aurum 7, a standard transit node, nothing notable, the kind of place that existed in the background of galactic commerce as furniture exists in the background of a room. She stepped off the ramp into a corridor that smelled of machine oil and recycled air and the particular staleness of a pressurized environment that never fully vented. She found a small operations office near the docking ring. She sat at the desk. She opened her slate. The formation depth readout was available on standard public transit telemetry. Cargo coordinators used it to manage corridor scheduling around large convoys. There were 18,200 signatures on the board, all inside the outer and mid-ring corridors, all at transit cruise speed. She looked at the readout for a moment. Then she looked at the brass astrolabe, which she had set on the corner of the desk. The fused side of the brass faced up. The warped curve of it caught the office light and bent it, throwing a small bright comma onto the ceiling. She picked up her slate. She opened the protocol authorization field, a field that existed in the network's deepest administrative layer, invisible to standard monitoring, accessible only through a sequence that looked, from outside, like a routine transit corridor maintenance command. She had not filled in the authorization yet. She held the field open and looked at the dampener telemetry for the outer ring. The oscillation was in place. The formation was fully committed. Vex's channel request to Zaltoris had shown up on the relay's public diplomatic traffic log, flagged for transit coordination, the way all flag-level communications did. She did not know what was said on that channel. She did not need to. She looked at the astrolabe again. 4.1 million names she did not have. One archivist's instrument she was holding, the same weight. Her thumb hovered over the authorization field. She pressed the authorization. No sound, no light change in the operations office. The slate registered the command in the same flat, unhurried way it registered everything, a small confirmation line appearing at the bottom of the field, the kind of line that looked like a routing receipt. On a standard transit monitor, it would have looked like a maintenance window opening, which was, technically, what it was. Soli set the slate face down on the desk. She looked at the astrolabe. She had 43 seconds before the outer ring dampeners completed the polarity transition. She knew this because she had run the calculation 811 times over 11 years, checking against different formation sizes, different transit depths, different network load conditions. She had the number the way a surgeon has a heartbeat count, not memorized but absorbed, part of the body. 43 seconds. She straightened the astrolabe so the fused side faced the wall, the cleaner brass catching the office light instead. Then she waited. On the Kethvar, the first thing that failed was the lateral drive feed. It did not fail loudly. It did not fail with an alarm or a warning cascade or the shudder of systems trying and giving up. It simply stopped providing output, the way a tap stops when someone closes a valve 3 rooms away. The readout on the engineering board went from a normal operational number to 0, and then to a status code that Vex's chief engineer had never seen in 30 years of service. A code that, when she queried it, returned a definition that said plasma physics suspended in local geometric frame. She stared at that definition for a full 2 seconds. Then every other drive feed gave the same code, simultaneously, and the Kethvar stopped being a warship and became a very large, very expensive object drifting at transit corridor speed with no way to change that. The weapons systems locked next. Not powered down, locked, as though the targeting geometry had been removed from the underlying mathematics that the weapons depended on, leaving them perfectly intact, but aimed at a kind of space that no longer existed inside the corridor. Vex felt the change through the deck before the alerts came, the particular absence of vibration that meant the drives were no longer working. He had served on ships for 30 years. He knew what a working ship felt like from the inside, the way you know a building is solid from how your footsteps sound in it. The Kethvar had stopped feeling solid. He looked at the formation display. 18,200 signatures. Every one of them had gone from transit drive active to nothing. The display did not show them as stopped. It showed them as present, positions confirmed, but the drive status column next to each signature was running the same code his engineering chief had just queried. Plasma physics, suspended in local geometric frame. All of them, 12 seconds from the first failure. Vex stood at the display. The blue transit corridor light still held around the ship, steady, unchanged, as though nothing had happened and nothing was happening. The corridor did not care. The corridor was doing exactly what it was built to do. He opened the channel to Zaltoris. In the Zenith Spire's secondary observation chamber, the Prime Arbiter watched the constellation of formation lights on his display go still. Not dark, still. Every ship in place, every position confirmed, and then the drive status feeds beginning to return a code that his tactical system flagged yellow, then amber, then red, and then stopped flagging because the code was outside its reference library, and it did not know what color to assign to something that had no category. Zaltoris was still looking at the display when Vex's voice came through. Prime Arbiter, A pause. In 30 years of receiving field reports, Vex had never paused before a sentence. We have lost drive function across the full formation. Weapons are locked. We cannot maneuver. We cannot fire. We are, another pause shorter. We are stationary. Zaltoris said nothing. The network, Vex said. The dampener arrays. They inverted the polarity geometry across the full corridor system. Our drives need a stable plasma frame to function. There is no stable plasma frame inside these corridors anymore. There hasn't been, I think, for approximately 43 seconds. He had done the math too, apparently. Zaltoris looked at the display. 18,200 points of light, motionless in the web. The largest armada the Ascendancy had ever deployed, committed to a corridor network that had spent 11 years becoming a cage, and no one had known because it was classified as infrastructure. Because it was infrastructure. Because the category said it was harmless, and the category had always been right before, and being right before is a very convincing reason to believe you will be right again. He said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "What are our options?" Vex's answer was very short. "I am waiting to hear from the humans about that, Prime Arbiter." The broadcast came from Relay Station Aurum 7 on a standard civilian band, routed through the transit network's public communications layer. It reached every ship in the formation within 8 seconds. It reached the Zenith Spire 4 seconds after that. It reached every public feed on every world within range in under a minute, not because anyone pushed it, but because it was filed on an open channel, and open channels propagate. Solis' voice was the same voice she had used at the Zenith Spire. Flat, even, no strain in it. "This is Commander Irina Solis, acting under authority of the Human Transit Administration. All Velari vessels currently within the Veil Transit Network are immobilized under Protocol Null Vector. No crew is in danger. Life support, environmental controls, and internal systems are fully operational on all vessels. Your drives and weapons will not function within the network's current configuration." A pause. The kind of pause a logistics coordinator leaves when reading from a checklist. Evacuation corridors are open. Human salvage and transport vessels will dock with each immobilized ship in sequence, beginning at the formation's leading edge. Crew transfers will be conducted in the order logged in your own fleet registry, beginning with medical personnel and civilian contractors. We will work through the full crew roster at standard evacuation pace. No one will be left aboard. Another pause. The hulls will remain. They are now an asset of the Human Transit Administration. Pending reclassification under the new boundary terms, I will be transmitting to the Zenith Spire within the hour. She stopped there. No threat, no declaration of war, no speech. A logistics update delivered with the same energy as a cargo reroute notification, filed on a channel anyone could access, in the voice of someone going through a checklist, because the checklist was how you made sure nothing was missed. The salvage cruisers decloaked in clusters, materializing out of the transit corridor's background geometry, the way objects surface through deep water, slowly at first, then all at once. They were not warships. They were the kind of vessel built for heavy industrial work, broad, flat-fronted, covered in docking clamps and cutting arrays, and the articulated arms of large-scale cargo handling. They were also enormous. Each one latched onto a dreadnought with the efficient, unhurried grip of something that had done this particular job many times. The industrial clamps finding purchase at the hull junction points, the pressure seals engaging, the docking tubes extending. From a distance, from the corridor walls where the blue transit light still held steady, the scene looked like a very large salvage operation, which was precisely what it was. Inside the dreadnoughts, the Velari crews received the evacuation broadcast in the same way the command decks did. Clearly, completely, with full translation, leaving no ambiguity about the sequence or the timeline. On the Kethvar, a young communications officer named Tel, 22 years old, 3 months into his first deep space posting, heard the broadcast and then looked at the drive status display, which still read plasma physics suspended, and then looked at the docking tube extending toward the hull outside his viewport. He thought about his assignment orders, which had described this mission as a disciplinary action against a lesser species. He thought about the docking tube. He reported to the evacuation muster point because the broadcast had said that was the correct procedure, and the procedure was clear, and when the procedure is clear, you follow it. Vex stood at the viewport of the Kethvar's command deck and watched the docking tube seal against the hull. He was not thinking about the tactical situation anymore. The tactical situation was resolved in the same way a mathematical proof is resolved, not emotionally, not with any room for argument, just finished. His fleet had entered a network that had been built over decades to become a geometric prison. They had entered it voluntarily because it looked exactly like what it said it was. They had used it the way a tool is used, and it had used them back. He was thinking about the human commander, the one who had said noted and written things on a grey slate and put a piece of brass in her pocket and walked away. He had filed a report 3 weeks ago after a routine surveillance pass near the Vale Transit outer ring, noting that the dampener calibration cycles on the outer ring ran slightly long. He had filed it as a maintenance anomaly. He had recommended a follow-up inspection. The follow-up inspection had been deprioritized. The outer ring was civilian infrastructure. He had known something was wrong at the Zenith Spire. He had known it on the command deck when the logs were too clean. He had known it when the dampener frequencies came back wrong. He had opened the channel to Zal Taurus. He had said what he knew. Zal Taurus had said, "The network is civilian infrastructure." Vex put one hand flat against the viewport. The docking tube was fully sealed now. Through the tube's connection point, he could hear, very faintly, the sound of heavy machinery, the efficient, industrial sound of people who knew what they were doing it. Not hurried, not triumphant, just working. He had 40 minutes before his crew's evacuation slot in the sequence. He went to his desk, sat down, and began writing a full incident report, starting from the surveillance pass 3 weeks ago, working forward in order. He wrote it in the same flat, precise language he used for all his reports. He did not know who would read it. He wrote it anyway. Zaltoris had not spoken in 11 minutes when the second transmission arrived. Not from Solis this time. From the Ascendancy's own fleet monitoring system, which had been running damage projections since the drive failures began. The projection was simple. At the current rate of salvage operations, the Velari Armada's hull material will be fully claimed and in transit to human processing facilities within 72 hours. 72 hours. The largest armada in Ascendancy history, built over 60 years, crewed by 400,000 personnel who were currently, in orderly sequence, boarding evacuation transports operated by the species they had come to contain. He looked at the live feed from the corridor network. The salvage cruisers were lit against the transit blue like something industrial and patient, moving down the formation in sequence, latching and cutting and moving on. No weapons fire, no explosions, just work. The Ascendancy had weapons that could vaporize a planet's surface in minutes. They had defenses that could hold off any conventional fleet. They had the most sophisticated military technology in the known galaxy. None of it was in the network. None of it had needed to be. He thought about the human commander's hands, the way she had held the scorched brass astrolabe during the whole session, not as a prop, not to make a point, just because she was holding it. The way she had written things on her slate, the precise, unhurried way she had picked up the astrolabe and put it in her pocket when the session ended. He had not watched where she went after that. He had not thought it mattered. The display showed the salvage count ticking upward. The blue corridor light held steady, perfectly maintained, doing its job. He had one armada left. The reserve formation, held back from the transit operation because the corridors could not accommodate the full fleet simultaneously. Solis's next transmission had not arrived yet. He was waiting for it. Solis's second transmission arrived at the Zenith Spire 14 minutes after the first. It was short. The Vale Transit Network's outer ring extends to all registered corridor access points within ascendancy space. Protocol null vector remains active. Any vessel attempting to enter the network from the reserve formation's current position will experience the same geometric conditions as the primary fleet. The evacuation sequence for the immobilized formation will complete in approximately 68 hours. I recommend the reserve formation hold position. She did not say what would happen if it did not. She did not need to. Zaltoris stood in the observation chamber for a long time after the transmission ended. He was a precise thinker. He had built his reputation on it, on the ability to assess a situation accurately and act without the delay that uncertainty caused in lesser commanders. He believed in categories because categories were how you thought clearly, and he had thought clearly for 60 years, and the results had been the ascendancy's unchallenged dominance over 37 inhabited systems. He was thinking clearly now. The situation was not ambiguous. The human transit network extended. He pulled up the registry across a corridor system that covered, by area, roughly 3 times the volume of ascendancy space. The outer ring access points were not near the frontier. They were inside the frontier. They were inside because the network had been built by a civilization that moved goods and people across its full extent, which was, of course, vast, because that was what civilizations did. They built roads everywhere they went, and they went everywhere, and the roads were how you knew they had been there. He had known the network was large. He had not thought about what large meant in this context. He sat down. This was unusual. He did not generally sit during tactical assessments. He sat, and he looked at the registry, and he traced the corridor system's reach, and he did the arithmetic that he should have done before ordering the formation to enter. And by the time he was done, the arithmetic had produced a number that he did not say aloud, because saying it aloud would have made it more real, and it was already real enough. There was one remaining option. He had the Ascendancy's planetary defense arrays, still fully operational, still outside the network geometry. He had ground installations. He had weapons that did not require drive systems or transit corridors to function. He opened the command channel to his ground defense coordinator and held it open for 11 seconds. Then he closed it without speaking. She was a logistics officer. She had said noted. She had walked out of the Zenith Spire carrying a piece of burned brass, and she had gone to a relay station, and she had filed a maintenance order. He closed the channel because he understood, sitting there, that it did not matter what the Ascendancy still had. What mattered was what they were going to do with it, against a civilization that had spent 40 years building roads and had not once, mentioned what else the roads could do. He needed to know what else she had built. He did not know. That was the problem. Solis ate a meal in the relay station Aurum 7 break room while the evacuation sequence ran. It was a standard transit station meal, a protein block and something warm in a cup that was described on the label as vegetable broth and tasted approximately like that. She sat at a table that was bolted to the floor and read through the incoming evacuation progress reports on her slate while she ate. The sequence was running ahead of schedule. The salvage crews were good at their jobs. The Velari crew transfers were orderly. The personnel were frightened, most of them, which was understandable, but frightened people who are given clear instructions and a functioning process generally follow the process, because the process is something to hold on to. She noted 2 medical cases in the early transfers, both minor, both handled by the joint med teams she had prepositioned at the transit node 12 days ago. She finished the broth. She set the cup down. She picked up the astrolabe from the table beside her tray, turned it in her hands. The fused side, the clean side. The arc of reflected light it threw against the wall when the angle was right. She had been 11 years old when her mother had taken her to visit Ethelgard. This was not something she had mentioned at the Zenith Spire or logged in any report. It was not tactically relevant. She had been 11, and the resonance spire had been full of scholars who thought about space in ways that had nothing to do with military application. And she had spent 4 days following her mother through archive stacks that smelled of old data polymer and the particular sweetness of recirculated air that had been breathed by researchers for decades. She had not gone back. She had gone into logistics instead, which was a practical field, and she had been very good at it, and the things she had been good at had eventually included this. She put the astrolabe back in her pocket. She filed the next routing adjustment on the standard civilian band and stood up and took her tray to the return slot. The shuttle to the Zenith Spire took 4 hours. Solis slept for 3 of them, which she had trained herself to do the way pilots train themselves, deliberately, efficiently, without sentimentality about it. She woke when the docking alert sounded, washed her face at the small basin in the shuttle lavatory, checked her slate for any outstanding items in the evacuation sequence. 91% complete, ahead of schedule. She straightened her collar. She picked up her bag. She walked off the shuttle and into the Zenith Spire's lower docking ring, where the filtered iron air and the mineral cold of the outer hull were exactly as she remembered, and the overhead panels were still casting their thin, bluish light that made everyone look slightly ill. A Spire administrator met her at the ring entrance with the particular expression of someone who has been instructed to extend professional courtesy to a person whose actions have placed them in an extremely difficult emotional position. Commander Solis, the administrator said, Prime Arbiter Zaltoris has requested, he is asking, he is available to meet if you. I know, Solis said, that's why I'm here. She walked past the administrator toward the main chamber lift. The Zenith Spire's primary council chamber was not the same room it had been 14 hours and a fleet ago. The ambient system was still running, 21 degrees, filtered iron air, the thin blue light, the elevated dais where the Velari delegation sat, lower than it had seemed 14 hours ago, or the same height, and she was standing differently. Zaltoris was at the dais. Most of his council was present. Their crystalline plating had the pewter dullness the light gave it, not the iridescent shine she had seen during the session. They were very still. The live feed on the chamber's main display showed the transit corridors. Blue light. Salvage cruisers still working in sequence. The count of transferred crew ticked upward in the corner of the feed, steady as a pulse. Solis walked to the lower tier. She did not sit. She reached into her coat pocket and took out the astrolabe. She walked to the center of the chamber floor, not the delegation area, not the speaker's position, just the floor, and set it down. The brass made a small, clear sound against the stone, and then it was still, the fused side facing down this time, the cleaner surface up. It sat there between them, like the only thing in the room that mattered. She straightened up and looked at Zaltoris. The Ethelgard boundary, she said, effective as of this transmission. Velari systems are quarantined. No vessel with an ascendancy registry will transit the Veil Transit Network. The boundary is enforced at the network level, not by patrol, not by fleet action. Any ascendancy vessel that enters a transit corridor will experience the same conditions as your current formation. She paused, in the same way she paused when reading from a checklist. The Armada's hull material will be processed and used in the reconstruction of the Ethelgard archive, the physical structures first, then the orbital arrays. The reconstruction timeline is approximately 9 years. I'll send you the project schedule. Zaltoris said nothing for a long time. His optical clusters were fixed on the astrolabe on the floor. You could have done this at any point, he said, finally. His voice was flat. The translation rig gave it the measured baritone it always had, but something underneath the measured part was different now. You could have done this before the eradication. You could have shown us this at any time. Yes, Solis said. Why didn't you? She looked at him steadily. Because it was not necessary. Another silence. We corrected an overreach, Zaltoris said, and for just a moment it was the same phrase from the session, the same measured certainty. You will now submit to. "We do not write your laws, Zaltoris," Solis said. "We simply own the roads." The chamber was very quiet. No, not her, not boasting, not relieved. The way a fact is said flatly, completely, without needing to be argued. The salvage count ticked upward on the display behind her. The session record closed at 1847, local station time. Vex read the boundary declaration on his evacuation transport 3 hours out from the immobilized Kethvar, somewhere in the middle of his incident report. He had reached the section about the surveillance anomaly, the dampener cycles that ran long, the report he had filed, the deprioritized inspection. He read the boundary terms. He read the reconstruction timeline. He went back to his report. He added a section at the end, one paragraph, describing the moment on the command deck when the drive feeds went to zero, and the code came back plasma physics suspended, and he had understood in approximately 2 seconds that the category error had been total, and the network had never been what they thought it was. He noted that the category error appeared in the Ascendancy's reference systems going back at least 41 years, predating the human network's current configuration by a significant margin. He noted that this meant the error was not a failure of intelligence, it was a failure of imagination. He flagged the report for the highest classification level available to him. Then he thought about it for a moment and removed the classification flag. He filed it open, readable by any Ascendancy official with standard access. It seemed more useful that way. In the Zenith Spire's lower corridor, walking back toward the docking ring, Solis passed the panel with the hairline crack she had noticed before the session, the crack running the full length of the panel, the uneven stress in the Spire's structure. It was still there. The Spire's maintenance system had not flagged it yet, or had flagged it and deprioritized it, or had categorized it as cosmetic. She did not note it on her slate this time. She walked past it and through the docking ring and back onto the shuttle and sat in the window seat. The Spire's signal array was visible through the window, lit for the ongoing session that was technically still open, technically still in session, while the chamber behind her held a council that was working through what it meant to have the largest armada in its history converted into reconstruction material by the species it had moved to contain. The galaxy was doing its arithmetic. There were 17 other species who had watched the original broadcast, the sterile numbers scrolling beneath the seal, 4.1 million, and had said nothing, and done nothing, and waited to see which way the correction went. They were doing their arithmetic too. She took the astrolabe out of her pocket. She had left one on the chamber floor. This was a different one, the one she had been holding. She had two because she had gone back to the colony's records 3 months ago, when the preparation was nearly complete, and found that a second archivist's instrument had been recovered from the outer debris field, fused on the same side, the same warp in the brass where the heat had caught it. She had not mentioned this at the Zenith Spire. She turned it in her hands, clean side, fused side. The light from the spire's arrays caught the brass and threw a small reflection onto the shuttle wall, brighter than before, now that the spire's full lighting array was active. She watched the reflection move as the shuttle pulled away. The spire shrank in the window. She did not look away from it this time. 9 years later, the first structure of the rebuilt Ethelgard archive opened on the site of the original resonance spire. The cornerstone was Velari alloy. The record carved into the entrance wall listed 4.1 million names, beginning with the archivists who had been on the outer ring when the correction came, the ones closest to the open, who would have seen it first. The first name on the list was an archivist. His instrument was in the archives collection, behind glass, the fused side facing out. The display card beside it said, "Brass astrolabe, personal tool of an archivist, recovered from orbital debris, one of 2 surviving artifacts from the Ethelgard collection." It did not say who had recovered it. The second artifact was not in the display.